In the history of satiric writing and study, fixed and stable relations between satirist, reader, and satirized object have been long established and practiced. Such a satiric triangle emphasizes the opposition of satirist and the satirized object, and the reader's alignment with the satirist, and their naturally presumed judgment of the object of satire. However, I argue that satire is far more complicated and does not require readers' clear opposition to the satirized object and/or clear alignment with the satirist. This paper examines the late Qing satiric novel Strange Things Observed Over the Past 20 Years, 20年目睹怪现状, by Wu Jianren, its connection with the earlier satiric novel The Scholars, 儒林外史, and particularly how the unprecedented novelties it demonstrates suggests a profound sense of alienation in a world bereft of hope. The uncertainty of satire in modern Chinese literature can be traced to Lei Qing expose. Lu Xun called this genre 谴责小说, literally tells that censure. Although in his brief history of Chinese fiction, Lu Xun consists that Lei Qing exposes do share socially corrective goals of real satiric works like Wu Jianren's The Scholars. He rules out exposes as satire by critiquing their exaggeration and the lack of quote-unquote innuendo. Some of the Lei Qing exposes indeed present certain traits that differentiate themselves from previous satire. The Lei Qing expose Strange Things Observed Over the Past 20 Years by satirist Wu Jianren is a representative of the differences and unprecedented novelties. Strange Things was published as a series in New Fiction, 新小说, in 1903. It is composed of 108 chapters and adopts the story-in-story structure of traditional Chinese novels. It has two narrators and an editor. The principal narrator, 九死一生, literally 9 deaths, 1 life, or more loosely, barely alive after multiple perils, is a supposed author. He travels around the country and keeps a diary recording the strange things he encountered, witnessed, or heard from friends in the period of 20 years. When he leaves Shanghai due to bankruptcy, he entrusts his diary to a friend to find some kindred spirit to publish it. This diary eventually comes to the hand of a kindred spirit, whose pseudonym is 死里逃生, meaning narrow escape from the jaws of death, which bears a highly resemblance to 九死一生. 死里逃生 edits the diary, turns it into a novel, and sends it to Liang Qichao's journal, New Fiction. The adventure of the manuscript is thus told by an anonymous narrator who probably works for New Fiction. The essential distinction between the scholars and Lei Qing exposes like Strange Things is that Wu Jingzi, having realized the degradation and the malfunction of the institutionalized Confucian way of being and living, nevertheless advocates the pure ancient Confucianism and holds up model scholars like Wang Mian for emulation. The certainty and fixation of the classical satirical triangle characterizes the scholars, whereas the expose writers, as well as their satiric narrators, are so used to the ubiquitous strange things that the bizarre is accepted as routine. Everyone is trapped in the mire of a chaotic world. Only by wallowing in the mire with evil may one survive and even succeed. Furthermore, when Wu Jingzi satirizes, he sets up the ancient Confucian way of being as the ideal value system, whereas Wu Jianren mercilessly lay bare the collapse of the traditional value system itself. There surely exists an ideal that serves as a standard of right and wrong, but such an ideal is so lofty and difficult to realize in life that the opposition between the satirist and satirized object is severely undermined. The Lei Qing exposes, therefore, disturb the fixity of the satiric triangle, simultaneously complicating the relations among them and distinguishing themselves from the certain satire such as the scholars. In the meanwhile, the coexistence of tears and laughter grant the late Qing satiric novels a new face that particularly demonstrates the author's concern with the looming national crisis. Wu Jianren's enthusiasm for collecting jokes and anecdotes was well known even when he was alive. He worked as a journalist and editor for several entertaining newspapers for years. Additionally, he wrote and compiled several collections of jokes, anecdotes, and social news, which in fact were mainly rumors and gossip. Scholars note the significance of jokes in Wu Jianren's literary career. As Chen Pingyuan points out, quote, "Incorporating jokes into novels is a prominent feature of late Qing satiric novel," unquote. However, I believe that his writings, especially novels, aim not at laughter but at sorrow, anger, reflection, correction, reform, and ultimately, probably unreachable salvation. 笑话 jokes in Wu Jianren's writings, more often than not, are not the amusing humor or comic jokes that we usually expect. They are accounts of conducts that violate the law of propriety. Sometimes this type of moral transgression is too absurd and improper to be the mere objects of laughter or mockery. 笑话 is just a euphemism for absurdities and unthinkable, disgraceful deeds. These strange and unbelievably ridiculous human misdeeds, in both the public realm and within the family domain, are absolutely opposite to reason, righteousness, benevolence, justice, humanity, dignity, or sympathy. The abnormal things witnessed in strange things are often considered as 好笑 or 可笑. 好笑 and or 可笑 can be used to refer to things or deeds that are comical and laughable, but can also indicate something absurd. For example, conferring the title of imperial lady to a former prostitute is already very 好笑, while an imperial lady willingly sent by her husband to be a prostitute is even more 好笑. In the perspective of the young narrator, such things are dishonor, and merely talking about these transgressions is not a notable deed in his mentor friend Wu Jizhi's eyes. In this context, 好笑 or 可笑 is less indicative of anything amusing and comical. There are many 笑话 about officialdoms as well. One of them that the narrator witnessed is a low-ranking county official who is devastatingly impoverished and eventually commits suicide due to his lack of political connections. The narrator draws the conclusion that officialdom is a sea of misery. From this 笑话, ridiculous 笑话 beyond one's imagination also occurred in the family realm. One story is about a greedy man bringing a false charge against his own father, fabricating the fact that his father once joined the Taiping rebellion and conspires against the state to the day. Everyone who hears the story believes that the son should be charged as unfilial. Suffice to say that this 笑话 can cause neither wholesome laughter nor gentle smile. Rather, for observers and the listeners of these outrageous events, they are universally despicable. People can barely be amused when hearing them. At best, they engender sneers, bitter laughter, and shock, but far more often they provoke uneasiness, disapproval, scorn, indignation, and even grief. As Wu Jianren expressed on many occasions, through satire and 笑话, he awakens his reader with absurdity in order to cure social disease. In spite of his intention to cure and correct, the satiric world he represents is obviously without any healing warmth. The nihilist world is populated by cruel and absurd people that are incurable, leaving no space for hope or promising future. His representation of the world is hellish. No one can escape it. In such a world, the good are doomed to perish, while the evil are bound to revel. In Wu Jingzi's satiric world, one's withdrawal from the world is one's own violation, but Wu Jianren's characters are expelled from it. Cai Luisheng is framed by his fellow officials. Wu Jizhi is dismissed from his post because he refuses to bribe higher officials. The principal narrator, 九死一生, lives for home when he's finally ruined. 死里逃生, a former dandy who squanders his money in all sorts of entertainments, signs that, quote, the world is big, but I found no place to shelter myself, unquote, when he decides to quit his licentious life. Excessive jokes do not arouse excessive laughter. One can only weep in despair in such a world. Wu Jianren even juxtaposes tears with satire, which directly challenges the established understanding and expectation of satire. In 1902, Wu Jianren published a short essay consisting of 57 satirical comments entitled, quote-unquote, 吴简人 weeps, 吴简人哭. Each entry is a satirical comment and a presentation of the status quo, followed by a remark, 吴简人 weeps. For example, one entry writes, quote, there was a man who wanted to seek official career and asked an experienced man who knew a lot about officialdom, how can I become official? The experienced man answered, if you want to learn to be an official, you'd better go to a brothel and learn from the prostitutes. You need to learn how to ingratiate yourself, how to read others' minds, and you need to practice it and improve your skills. Then you can be an official. Otherwise, you will fail. Wu Jianren weeps. At the beginning of the essay, Wu Jianren clearly explains, quote, why does Wu Jianren weep? In the world, there are extremely altruist things, extremely sorrowful things, and also things altruist beyond tolerance, sorrowful beyond grief. Then the only thing I can do is to weep, unquote. Wu Jianren seems to be discontent with the implicit effort of satirical writing and the means to reveal the nature of the satirized object explicitly with his excessive tears. Juxtaposing satire with moral judgments clearly register his great anxiety about national crisis and salvation, despite the name of jokes. Poignant sweeping resounds in its representation of a degraded world, its portrayal of incompatible values and ideas, as well as a collapsed world order. Late Qing expose anticipate the May 4th writer's quote-unquote obsession with China. Wu Jianren might approach literature differently from Liang Qichao, but he primarily acts following Liang Qichao's call, which argues that the reform of literature leads to the reform of society.